so it's accessible for others.
Okay.
So it'll only be viewable by people within the groups. It's on a private YouTube channel that it'll be put to.
But it doesn't matter who does the recording, it ends up in the same place apparently. I was a bit puzzled about that too. So it won't be on your system somewhere, it'll still be on the new.
Yeah, because I think it gets linked to the name of the Zoom call, doesn't it?
Okay, that's fine. So what we're waiting for Jess. If I couldn't get on yesterday morning because of the clock change and everything, but can you fill me in on what Mick Roberts said?
Well, we went through things and trying to clarify what really were challenges and what weren't, because Mick had a list of 10 things, and
Right.
we used this sort of framing as a two-way table, which I produced. If you see, you've got all the challenges, and then so to carry on with that, I've tried putting some of your sort of sound bites into that.
Excellent.
There's a version which says in the Dropbox, which says challenges table 3 nov. I should have put down special election special or something.
So that's a later version than the one we were looking at yesterday, Dennis.
Yes, it's just okay,
I'll have a look.
And I've added Andy's things in bold for the moment so as to highlight them.
So which have you put that under? 1 or 2 or both? Channel, or it's not in either?
It's just in the Dropbox at the moment.
But not in one of the folders.
No, it's just challenges table. No.
Okay. Oh, I found it. Yep.
It's still supposed to be with 3 nov at the end.
Yep, got it.
What would be really helpful if you could send both Jess and I a link to the Dropbox and to the what's the other thing called?
The Slack.
The Slack. Yeah. Whenever I get into Slack, I get taken to Annapolis, where I've got a Slack account, but I don't seem to be able to get to the Newton one. So if you could, and Jess similarly hasn't got access to either of those two things.
Well, but we need to check out with your members. What I find with Slack,
Story of my life.
If I start putting Slack in my browser, Andy, I tend to come up with a number of recent options, and they, and I'm subscribed to 2 or 3 different Slack channels. So this is the one about workshop discussions.
Okay.
You know what I mean? If you start, so I don't know if that'll work for you, but otherwise you presumably have to go into Slack itself, and then it asks you, and then possibly change workspace or whatever it calls them.
Yeah, when I look at the workspaces, mine is pretty much constrained just to sysync, as I say. So, but I can see, yeah, I can try and work that out later.
Yeah,
you're definitely on the. I can see you, Andy, on the Slack workspace with your dober@princeton.edu address.
Well, if someone sends me a message through Slack, then I should try and be able to find that.
So
I think you're right that neither you nor Jessica are on the Dropbox. I'll change that.
That would be really helpful.
Yeah. I mean, so Andy's definitely, I've only got as far as checking channels 1 and 2. I mean, sorry, challenges 1 and 2. But Andy is definitely on both of those on the Slack thing. Okay. So it's just a question of you finding.
Does the Slack come with a URL which has the workshop discussions stuff in its as part of its name? Because perhaps if Andy had the link for that, it would enable him to go into the right Slack channel every time.
Yeah, just sign into another work. What is the other workspace called?
It's called Newton IDP Workshops Discussion.
Newton
IDP Workshop Discussion Groups.
We could have
That one
chosen
word.
something a bit snappier, couldn't we?
We could. And certainly, I've just looked. You're there as Dobber on challenges 1, 2, and 3. I haven't checked the others, but you should be able to join anything else.
Yeah, is that Newton got spaces in it or anything?
Yeah, it's just as you would write it. So it's Newton space, IDP space, workshop space, discussion space, groups.
Okay. Yeah.
Does your other Slack thing also use Dobber, or does it use something different as an email?
I think it uses Dobber, but that's
Yeah.
an interesting question.
Well, it's just that some of us, including me, have problems because we've been added to some of these things under a different email. And
Yeah, no.
you know, complicates life.
Yeah, I somehow the Dobber got used, and mainly I try and use Dobson, but I guess, okay, I will try. We don't need to spend this meeting working out how I get access to Slack. I can work that out later.
But
Okay.
can you see if you can't see the Dropbox at the moment, Dennis? Should we?
I've just done that.
That will have gone to my email.
I've just added you to the Dropbox, and I think that involves Dropbox sending you a message or something.
Yeah.
So thus allowing.
I was just going to suggest we sent Andy and
I just sent you the file via email actually.
Okay.
The doc. So Dennis doc from today, from yesterday's discussion.
Yeah. That's great. That's what I was going to suggest.
But I think the link I have for the Dropbox only allows you to view it. I don't know if when you arrive there you find you can edit it if you. But...
Yeah, I haven't got that link on my email, so that's. Oh yeah, I did. I just got it. Just arrived. Okay, go to folder. Fine, that is now working. Sign in with Google. Of course, that's going to confuse it. Yeah.
What's the name of the Dropbox folder, please, Dennis?
It's just called IDP.
Oh,
IDP.
Are you on that, Olivia? Oh, yeah.
I don't seem to. I can check online.
No, you're not. Oh, bother.
I suspect this was set up fairly early on, and it was an incomplete list.
Okay. Well, I'll add Olivier. That's sorry. I should have put him in my mass production. The trouble we've ended up with such an unwieldily large number of participants on the program. I'm reluctant to add all 200 or whatever it is of them to the Dropbox. So,
Okay, I've got it. Thank you.
yeah. Now, of course, it requires my Dropbox password, and I have no idea what that is. So
Here we go, Randy.
get your Dropbox. Yeah. Okay. Reset password. Okay. Okay, I appear to be in Dropbox. Okay. Of course, it's trying to sell me a much bigger thing. Oh, right. Okay, so
Dennis, this updated 3nov
Yeah.
table, has that been updated with this, with all the list that Andy's just sent us, or is that?
Yes, that's my point. Yes, that's what I've done.
Great.
Well,
Okay.
the only other thing is I reinstated by popular demand a column for environment human interface, which I've left out, which is why it's a bit thin at the moment, but I popped a couple of things in.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I've caught up now. So everything is in this latest version of the table.
And some of Andy's things seemed a bit of a sort of mega challenge, that they seem to be. So I've called them. So Andy's things appear as like the first one's 1.1a. That's because I thought there's how many viruses are out there, and then there's the immunological priming and levels of exposure. So I call them 1.1a and 1.1b because I wanted to put them in different boxes. But it doesn't matter. I mean, this is only supposed to be like an index entry. So I mean, we shouldn't. It's basically saying that Andy's said something, and you'll find it better explained in his notes, which possibly belongs in data/interface.
Mm.
And what is the folder called? Because I don't have a folder with anything from the Newton in my Dropbox.
It's just called IDP.
Yeah, I don't have that.
I think the way these things work, you should have got what I sent when I filled in your name and said you had editing rights and then said share.
Okay,
it should have sent you an invitation. You should have an invitation to share.
Go to folder. Yeah, it says go to folder. I just see if it does that.
And if you agree to share, you should then find that 300 megabytes of your precious space have been taken up by this particular Dropbox folder.
Okay. Or
if anyone has a problem with that, let me know, because I'm sure it could be pruned. With like archive stuff could be taken out, for instance.
It could be that my Dropbox is so full of undergraduate talks for courses that there's no space.
The other thing I think is if you share things, unless you're possibly I think for your normal Dropbox user, it goes into your as a top level Dropbox folder. So it should be in that sense easy to spot as just IDP. And then within IDP, you'll find there's a subfolder for each of the challenge themes. And if you went into the one, I think it's labeled channel 01, you'll probably find I put your notes there.
Yeah, I have it. Right.
But then I put the table at the top level in the IDP folder.
So there's challenges table 3rd of November.
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. See it. Right. Good. Sorry to be slow about all of that. Now, what do we?
So this table, I should say, I mean, I'm sorry you haven't got Jess with us yet, Andy, because this table was partly inspired by Jess, because I read through her notes and I thought these are terrific, but I think she's not really just covering emergence. She's treading on quite a lot of other toes as well, or suggesting good points that really belong not immediately under emergence. So I thought, so my way of trying to understand that was to draw up this table. And I've tried to put everything that's been mentioned. So I've tried to put everything from Jess's notes for emergence, from Miriam's notes about interventions, and from Deirdre's notes about endemicity or elimination, and Mick's notes, which we went through yesterday, which were originally, I think under channel 02.
So I see what you've done. So this is effectively the outline for 5 different challenges papers.
Yeah. So if we're sticking with what we said we'll do, we would have a challenge paper for each column.
Right.
And putting them in methodological boxes may or may not be the best way within each one to sort out the order in which you put the challenges. I mean, that's, you know, might well not be the best order, but at least it sort of is one way of indexing them.
And it also gives an idea of where the cross references are likely to.
And then what I'm hoping to do over the next week is to look at all the challenges we've had suggested so far under the various methodological headings, and try and do the sort of inverse cross-referencing, which may well not be quite the same kind of may not give quite the same kind of result, but I think it'd be interesting to do that. And it might, one thing I thought that doing both these exercises might do, it might throw up something which is, being covered in a methodological paper, but really belongs in a specific application, like it's about emergence, or vice versa.
Right.
So and
I think one might also expect that some of the different application areas would be perhaps generating similar methodological challenges. So, you know, they might come.
Well, exactly. If you spot that the same methodological kind of problem is coming up in 3 different applications, it maybe suggests that the best place for it is in the methodology paper, and just to be referred to in the specific application one. But the thing that came out when I did this from Jess's notes, or that seemed to me, but I might be wrong, was that most things seemed to fall either under environment or under emergence, and there wasn't very much that was environment/human interface, which was the original theme too. Then I got a bit of a kickback against that yesterday's discussion. So it's certainly, so I know it's an open question really, of if we take the first 3 columns, I think rather go together. Is the question is whether dividing the topics there into 3 columns makes the best sense or not.
Well, it strikes me that given that the second column is so underpopulated, it would make sense to actually just have 4 columns. The environment.
Well, that was what I was doing, Andy. But I think what was being objected yesterday was that I possibly pushed things into column 1 or 3, which do actually belong in column 2, and I haven't gone through and tried to reinstate them. So
there might be more things that people like Mick and, well, I think Mick and Cons are the people who yesterday who would know about this area in their amount of detail, but might feel ought to go in that column 2 that aren't there at the moment.
So I thought what we might do is leave a second column there for the moment, so that in discussing any particular individual challenge, it's open to anyone to say, well, I think this would go best in column 2. And if we have a discussion in that sort of spirit, then when we're a little bit further down the line and actually ready to begin writing, perhaps, writing sort of final stuff, at that point, we might be saying, well, are we really going to try and do this as 3 papers or 2?
Yeah.
Is it a little bit maybe a question, just a thought, how you see emergence? Also, basically, I mean, if you have the interface, this will be sort of the house shifting spillover event, and the emergence, I mean, this could exactly cover this, or this could be more towards like the spread of a novel pathogen in a certain population, like a human population.
I don't think this is answering your question quite, Cons, but I think my suggestion was that perhaps the logic of it is that that column 2, environment human interface, is like it's the boundary, it's the borderline between 1 and 3. But if the borderline is very interesting, then maybe the borderline deserves its own paper. But it may be that it's more trouble than it's worth deciding with particular things whether they sit on the border or whether they sit one side of it. So I think the best thing to do is not to worry too much about what things are at the moment, but to discuss more for each identified challenge what it is we're really trying to talk about, what we're trying to say. And then when that's clearer, it'll, the clearer those get, I think the easier it will be to see how they go best together.
Right.
So what should we be doing today?
Yeah.
Well, I think one thing we might do is just see whether everyone whether there's some overlap between what different people have suggested. So that will typically possibly be where we've got 3 or 4 challenges in the one box. Just but also perhaps to look at the empty boxes and say, for instance, is there really nothing anyone wants to say about the economics, behavioural politics to do with that should be going in columns 2 or 3?
Yeah, I mean, I feel straight away that integrating economic and epidemiological models should be in column 4.
Under interventions.
Yeah.
Oh. Tell you what I did yesterday. I think you might have to make, if you as host could allow me to share the screen.
Yeah.
Is if I share my copy, then as I edit it, I can type away and everyone can see what's happening to it.
That'd be a perfect way to do it.
So it says at the moment the host has disabled attendees sharing. So I think
I'll let me give you sharing rights or whatever. Here you go.
I'm sure we can get Paul back to sort it if there's a problem.
Here you go. Rename to the waiting room. Remove. Oh.
It should now be sorted. I've just made Dennis. If you check Dennis, you might be up to now.
Yep, that looks okay.
Okay. Great.
Right. Thanks, Paul.
Okay.
So
All I was allowed to do was report you.
Yeah, just jump in if you need me. That's fine.
Thanks.
Right.
Okay.
Now, the alarming thing is, I think that hopefully that's shared from, you can see it's shared. For some reason it doesn't show. I'm still seeing just the pictures of you and not.
No, we can release icon, and so I assume
you see it all right?
The others, yeah.
Okay, that's good. Right. Okay, so Andy was saying I should take the integrating ecological epidemiological models and put it in
there.
Yeah. 4. There you are.
Yeah.
Evolution of virulence, that's in environment modeling. This could be also discussed if this is there or in different columns, maybe.
So where up in the modeling 1.3. Sorry, where are you suggesting that should go?
That's a good question. I would, well, intuitively, I would put it first maybe under emergence.
Which is this? Sorry.
Modeling environment. So evolution of virulence 1.3.
Yeah, I will put that in emergence.
So you're in the second, yes, just about where you are, Dennis.
The evolution of virulence.
Yeah.
Yes.
It can probably go in both because it's, I'm just looking around. It seems to be one of the only mentions of evolution at all. So I suspect there'll be different.
Well, I think the top one there, modeling, doesn't dynamics of zoonotic viruses in reservoir species, including mutation, doesn't that sort of?
Well, we're not. The thing is, we're not really worried about evolution of virulence of all the viruses while they're in their natural environment. Is it going to evolve virulence once it's emerged in its new host?
No, I think you're right, Andy. I'm agreeing with that, but I think that.
Okay.
So I think the reference to evolution of viruses, in the reservoir, is still there in the top item in the first column in modeling bit. dynamics of zoonotic viruses in reservoir species, including mutation. So obviously,
Does that?
I mean, virus evolution virus evolution is obviously interesting there, because we're not concerned with how virulent it is, whether it's killing the bats it's in, but we are interested in whether it's evolving, because of course it might be evolving something that helps it to get into other species, and particularly humans. So
yeah, so it's the kind of adaptation of to what extent.
Absolutely no pressure on it to do that. I mean, I think you could put mutation and evolution. Yeah, mutations are given. Everything mutates all the time.
So should I just call that evolution? Sorry.
Yeah.
How does that link in with the point at Andy's bottom point in that about dynamics in reservoir communities? So that,
well, they ought to go next to each other, oughtn't they?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, they might be one point.
Yeah. Well, there's also this thing about what's special about bats is more what I was thinking there.
Okay, yeah.
Well, yes. If it's,
So that's come from Jess's list, the first one, presumably.
Yes.
This one is from Jess, isn't it? Yeah.
And so and they're obviously linked.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The pedant in me would reverse the order of land use change and climate change, but being pedantic, I would have land use change is much more important than climate change.
Yeah. We can, and of course, this numbering is just from the preliminary notes we've got.
People's original notes.
It's just referring to.
That would be mixed.
At some point, when things have settled down a bit, we can recast the whole thing. Maybe do a scissors and paste job on Andy's and Jess's notes, if they don't mind, to produce.
In some ways, we also need at the very bottom safeguarding best advice from political interference. You almost need that in every column.
Yes, I mean, some of these, I mean, it may well be that some of these things in politics really go across.
Well, I mean, there is a policy and politics challenge.
Exactly. I mean,
and so it may be that that's where those points would most naturally be addressed
in the methodology paper.
But we might still want those points to be made. I mean, one of the things that we discussed a bit yesterday was the idea of having in these papers, having not only the challenges, but one would need an introduction and some sort of discussion. And the natural thing would be to have sort of linking material that moved you, because there was some sort of natural ordering to these chapters at least.
Yeah. So
something that pointed you through from one to the next, and remarks about safeguarding from political interference is something that could go in introductory sections with a reference to whatever challenge 10 is going to say about them.
Yeah,
perhaps. So I mean, that might be a way to make it cross-cutting.
Right.
But if it's particularly relevant in one, to one particular place, then it's important that we identify that.
Yeah, I think that's, yes. The thing possibly in both, maybe it's cut across politics and economics but I think important at the environment level is that it's surely an important point that if you want to prevent future pandemics, that the world community, through WHO or otherwise, should be prepared to spend quite a lot of money on studying studying and monitoring the environment because of the pandemic potential, and that may not be an easy budget to. It's all very, I mean, suppose you do a calculation that by spending £1 billion every year on monitoring the environment, you halve the probability of getting a pandemic every 10 or 20 years. It's it obviously makes sense, but governments with thinking on the relatively short time scale governments think on may well be always trying to cut the budget of that, because they say we spent $1 billion last year monitoring the environment, there weren't any pandemics, why are we spending $1 billion on this?
Right.
And they keep on cutting and cutting the budget until bang, along comes a pandemic and they haven't been monitoring the environment as well as they should. So it is, you know, I think at the very least it would want referring to in the introduction to the, it may be that all the political and economic things are best dealt with in the methodological papers, but I think they'll want cross references to them in the earlier ones.
But I would think that there are some specific issues here, and maybe I'm just repeating what's been discussed in previous meetings. I missed most of them, but part of the issue is how the question of zoonotic risk can insert itself into the existing discussion on debate on environmental policies, on issues of conservation, which have been, you know, quite challenging for a long time between science and politicians on financial powers, but usually being completely disconnected from infectious diseases. So I think it's important to make the point that we are not going to solve this by, you know, creating a brand new debate and discussion just about zoonotic risk from the environment, by engaging with the kind of conservation on the environmental scientists who are already engaged in advice on advocacy on policy and on economics.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, these things do get entangled. I mean, you know, if you ask why should we look after the tropical rainforests, you know, there can be the answer that they're important in dealing with CO2, so they relate to climate change, that they're important for conserving biodiversity, and thirdly that messing them up may well make give you higher probabilities of pandemics. So it's yeah, it's
yeah, so that's an argument that's been around for a while, that's been gaining more attention. But I guess the kind of hard evidence on the you know, how reliable the models, the kind of predictive models are, is still work in progress. So I think that's
so I suppose
it's important to highlight it here, I think.
Well, it's about highlighted, and maybe I mean, I think it would be useful. I mean, I don't think this would necessarily take more than a paragraph or so to show it's a challenge to politicians rather than to modelers. So whether it comes to be a full-blown challenge or whether it's just something we mention in discussion material is maybe up for grabs. But it maybe wants to characterize the political difficulties maybe of dealing with each of those, the three sort of threats I've mentioned. I mean, the point being that, well, a point being that, as we've seen, when you actually get a pandemic, then countries can all see the need to deal with this problem immediately because it's thrust in their face. Whereas with the problems of climate change, biodiversity, and avoiding future pandemics, the thing isn't in their face. And so they can, for various different ways and for different reasons, they can maybe get away with ignoring it. And I think we're trying to persuade them not to ignore it but recognizing that there's going to be a political difficulty which countries have to, we try to bring countries together to agree on that it's important and to put their money into it. And I suppose there's a discussion which does come closer to modelling, which I think perhaps, which is whether what is best value in that. Is it things like the you know, whatever it's called, the Global Genome Project, or is it more effective surveillance of people who are in contact with wildlife? You know, what are the components of the best surveillance strategy, and if they're in which ones cost a lot of, in particular, I suppose, which ones cost a lot of money but are worthwhile, because that's going to be the hard sell, isn't it?
Yeah.
Andy, where would you like to take us next?
Just wondering. I mean, do we want? So I'm just. Can you remind me who's in charge of each column, or who's going to sort of head it up?
Well, it was that you were in charge of column 1 and Mick in 2 and Jess 3, Miriam 4 and Deirdre 5.
That makes sense to me. I think that would work very well. In their absence, it's a question of, what can we put in their columns? Or is there stuff we can take out of their columns and move into column 1? I think,
and particularly since Dennis had removed column 2 from the action, perhaps we need to think, you know, do we need a column 2? And if so, it probably needs a bit more in it than it's got at the moment.
I totally agree with that.
But I guess we just need to look through them all and see whether stuff needs to be moved, which is a bit.
I mean, you could argue, stretching the definition of environment-human interface a bit, that the second and third items in the first box could go in column 2.
Yeah,
because they're basically the sort of ways in which things move to the interface. So
yeah.
Let me as an experiment move those 2 across. They're terribly easy to
yeah, that's good. Do that. Yeah.
So that leaves the top left box more purely about the environment.
What is the point about moving hosts and vectors? Is this moving because of habitat change, or the fact that they do move, or rather than a static? Or I mean, I wasn't quite sure what the movement.
I think it was it was being thought of in the context of land use and climate change, Valerie. So I think it was
okay. So it's
so we can leave that
sort of home range, moving home ranges or whatever.
Or contact opportunities also between different species.
Yeah. Yeah.
So actually, sorry, the ecology livestock interactions, this would be very similar to moving hosts and vectors. This has been now moved to the environment human interface. It's a little bit, again, this definition, right? If we cover this environment, or if this would be sort of the contact opportunity between different species, which of course addresses the interface as well.
Yeah. Well, I guess the ecology livestock bit ought to be in the first column, and then the livestock human in the second column. But I don't know whether it makes sense to separate those. I mean, livestock is presumably farmed animals, or in general, is it?
Yeah. Yeah, perhaps it's better if should I move that back then?
Well, I don't know.
I'm not sure, no, because it's still really that interface. Because the moving host on vector, the 2.3, that's the challenge of data collection about the hosts. And so just the fact that they have complex spatial-temporal dynamics in places where we just can't go and see them. So that's related to the point above, which is sampling the viruses. So you have the issues of sampling the viruses, and then just the issues of finding the host on the vectors themselves. And so I think there's something enough to be said with the first one with about the viruses and about the host on vector, even independently of the challenges of change, of climate change, land use change, and livestock. So I think that what you've got here makes sense to me, at least.
And so the idea is then we find some bright younger person to write the challenges with us.
That would be wonderful.
Maybe I'll talk to Christina Faust or Cara Brooke, see if they're busy. So what are the next steps?
Well, I suppose if we think, and I would like Jess's input on this as well as all yours, if we think that things are reasonably settled in their various columns,
right?
Then I think the next thing would be for someone to
Jess has appeared.
Oh wow. Good. Welcome.
I got the time zones mixed up. I'm so sorry. Or the daylight savings or whatever. Sorry. Fortunately, Andy, I'm sure was totally on top of everything.
Yes,
he mentioned sending a flying pigeon to
alert you. To see if you were there, but I couldn't see the dog outside, so I thought, have you overslept? Or
yeah. Well, I also thought it was 10 because I guess I don't know. Anyway, I apologize.
I thought it was 9:30, and then I checked last thing. I thought, oh no, it's 9 o'clock.
Jess, we're discussing the table of challenges table 3rd November, special US election edition, which is in the IDP Dropbox, which I think you just had an invitation to share this?
I have, yes. I am. Let me open that up.
But having joined, are you in the screen share that we're?
I am, yes. Yeah.
Okay, so you can see it. So that is in the Dropbox. You will have access to it. If you wish to take it away and turn it into your own version, you're absolutely welcome to do so. But remember to put JM at the end of it so that save it as as your version sort of thing. So we've had quite a lot of argument about
discussion
to arrange these things. The idea is if we could allocate the challenge, if we call these individual thing challenges, if we could agree that the challenges are roughly speaking in the right columns, then we could for each column start try and produce a sort of bit of a fleshed out skeleton of text. So in other words, a sentence or a paragraph for each of these sound bites saying what they are. And
some of those presumably already exist, like
exactly because quite a lot of these sound bites are in fact me condensing into a sound bite. I hope capturing what it's about. Typically say a paragraph of your or Andy's notes or sentence, because that's what I was doing. I've been for and also Miriam's and Deirdre's, I've been taking the notes we've got and just trying to change them into a soundbite, which might be almost the name of a challenge. So the background as to what these little phrases mean can often be found in the notes. And for instance, 3.1 to 3.6 refer to your terrific notes. And I don't know if I've said to the others that actually this table is a bit inspired by your notes, because it seemed to me that I read through and I thought, gosh, there's an awful lot of good stuff here. But I thought she's not really just covering emergence, she's dipping her toes into several of the other columns. So I thought I need to set out a table to see where the overlaps and cross references are. So that was where this came from. So I hope so. Your 3.1 to 3.6, which are yours, have been moved around a bit, and I haven't been terribly consistent if I think about it, because I'm just looking in the interventions column. I can see 3.5 crops up about 4 times, which is reference to your fifth paragraph, your paragraph numbered 5. Whereas in the case of Andy's, I've called them A, B, C. I would have called them A, B, C, and D, but I didn't get around to doing that for yours. But so the idea is if we can agree things are roughly in the right columns, at that point we can give them back a bit of their text, or if it hasn't got text, create a little bit of text around them, so that each of these sound bites turns into a sentence or paragraph, and see if they look as though they're a reasonably coherent order within each column for a challenges paper, with the title provisionally the column heading.
So within Dropbox, are there the essentially the draft bits for each column?
Yeah, the notes these are based on.
Those could be cut and pasted in by whoever's in charge of each column.
Yeah, so exactly. So for instance, that Andy's notes should be found in the Dropbox folder, which begins CH01, and yours, Jess's, should be in CH03.
Should we go through, now that we have Jess as well, just and see whether she's happy with where you've put the 3-point X's?
Absolutely.
Because we've talked a bit about the 1s and 2s, but Jess will know what she actually had in mind for some of these. Particularly the ones that have moved across columns.
So for anyone who wants to, they might wish to at this point to see if they can get Jess's notes out of CH03, which I shall hang on. So I'm just so CH03 in emergence. Yeah, it's got someone's paper, which I just seen relevant, which I've put in there, and it's got, oh God, sorry, I'm having a difficulty opening it because it's, but
yeah, well, we've still got your screen, so
are you seeing the table, or are you jumping?
Well, we've still got the table. We've got other little bits and pieces popping up.
Here you go. Right, well, I don't know if it helps, but for a moment, let me go back to the same screen. This is Jess's notes on top of it. So that's
yeah.
So 3.1 was what I think is one of the things in 3.1 was this sampling and monitoring zoonotic viruses, which seemed to me to be part of surveillance of the environment, so sort of belonged in column 1. I mean, anticipating risk, you might say, is a column 1 or possibly column 2 sort of thing. isn't it? Because it's emergence is when the slimy creature creeps out of the deep and starts attacking you. Then at the moment, there's nothing of Jess's that I've put in. What's that trying to get me to do? For the moment, there's nothing of Jess's I've tried to put into column 2.
Human animal contact.
Oh, human animal contact. So that was also mentioned. That was also one of Mick's themes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I guess anything on the, yeah, there you've got it, 1.1, the immunological priming, levels of exposure stuff, that idea of immune surveillance is there too. That's good.
And then in the other direction, I think it was Jess's 3.5 and possibly 3.6 that I felt strayed into interventions, possibly. So, yeah, because I think there's a lot there about R0 and RT as it alters with interventions. So that seemed to me to be interventions, but you know, if someone goes through Jess's, I mean, I think if one's got a fairly comprehensive index of challenge headings, it would be easier for someone, ideally Jess, but she can delegate if she wants to, you know, going back to her paragraph 5 to where the suggestion from the table is that would best be covered under the interventions heading, to go through, you know, fleshing out the intervention headings from an intervention point of view, but obviously at the same time thinking maybe that there's some parts of this that really don't belong in interventions, they relate to some other heading. And if you've got the overall index, then hopefully that'll make it much easier to make that suggestion. You know, the suggestion could either be, yes, that goes exactly in some heading that's already in one of the other columns, or it could be, this is an extra topic that ought to go into one of the other columns.
So to put it in sort of very specific terms, and by emergence, we mean that phase where we've moved into stuttering chains and onto the kind of exponential growthy phase. Is that what we mean?
Emergence, I think, is sort of by definition where it's got into the humans and is spreading between humans, but isn't quite yet at the stage where it's turning into a pandemic.
Right.
Once it turns into a pandemic, when it gets into a proper full-blown exponential stage, I think we perhaps move on to interventions, because that's not. I mean, I'm sure for every one of these attempts at a dividing line, someone will be able to find a question that sits exactly on the dividing line. But I think that's the concept, and then by the same token, endemicity or elimination is where you go beyond that to saying that are we just in a situation of interventions to slow down, control, whatever? Are we actually thinking we might get rid of it, or are we settling down to a long-term steady state? So again, it's not an absolutely hard and fast logical distinction, but I think the column headings make good sense, except there's a slight doubt about the second column, environment human interface, because that could be said to be just the boundary between column 1 and column 3. And the question is whether the boundary itself is so interesting it deserves its own column. So,
what do you think, Andy? I sort of think I would agree with it having its own column if we're thinking about things like cross immunity and it bubbling, you know, like surveillance of communities that are at that interface, etc.
Yeah, well, I mean, when I looked at it earlier, and it was there were two things in there. I thought, no, we should blend it into emergence. But I think it is worth thinking what goes into that. I mean, it does overlap a lot with the sort of Jamie Lloyd Smith trickling chains and things like that. So it's revisiting quite a bit of what was done there, but expanding on it to still say what remains challenges and which of the boxes we thought of 10 years ago have actually now been ticked.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, the ones that are 2 point something are mixed, aren't they?
They're
Yeah.
mixed.
And so those are the ones where he initially put them down as under the interface. So whether they are now in their rightful place or whether.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Mick started off by giving a list of 10 headings, which were rather sort of very broad things, mostly like land use and climate change and so on. So what we were trying to do yesterday was to winkle out from those what the challenge was, if we could be more specific about that. And I think we ended up deciding that 3 of the topics didn't really amount to challenges. So we've got 2.1 to 2.7 in there, I think.
Yeah.
With some sort of fleshing out of, and I think we tried, I mean, land use and climate change have stayed the same, just as simple, bold topics.
And they clearly do need to be in the environment column rather than the interface, I think. So.
And then the things like, but then there's a bit more fleshing out of things like the ecology livestock interactions, which is in column 2, and where the other 2 point thingies end up.
We've got effects of cross immunity as 2.9 under emergence.
Those actually are, yeah. I mean, I think 2.8 and 2.9 are points which were about cross immunity that were originally picked up from Andy's lecture.
Okay, so they're not actually particularly interface.
No, they
points. So that 2 is a bit
might be
misleading.
interface points when I've.
Well, I was thinking cross immunity would be in like the people in the wildlife trade who are massively exposed to lots of different
Exactly.
Okay.
Do they generate enough cross immunity, which is exactly at the interface to form some sort of barrier, or what happens in them determines whether the virus dies out or is passed on.
So that really ought to move back into column 2. Yeah. Okay. Dennis?
Sorry, which?
The effects of cross immunity.
Yeah, well, actually, we've got role of cross immunity.
We have. Yeah.
I think
Andy
was making 2 slightly different points, and I hedged my bets by putting one in. And I think, again, that, well, if people want me to move it, of course I'll move it. But otherwise, it seems to me that Andy would probably be the best person to say what he meant about both these things. I think they were also trying to make 2 different points. And where they belong.
Well, that's what I was saying. Whoever's heading it up then finds who wrote the original paragraph and delegates them to accept how they've edited it.
Yeah. So. So in a way, since these points belong to Andy, I really ought to ask him to add them to his notes and take responsibility for them. That's 2.8 and the 2 cross immunity things.
So, sorry, I'm clearly have not had enough coffee yet either. So we're going to have 5 chats.
I can send some over if you like.
That would be wonderful. Also, one of the breakfasts you make, Andy, that'd be perfect. Pancakes, please. I mean, so we're gonna have 5. We're trying to write 5 manuscripts, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I'm running emergence, Andy's running environment and environment human interface. Or Andy,
no, that's Mick.
Okay.
Mick,
okay, and someone's doing interventions and someone's doing endometrial elimination. And our homework right now is to figure out, just to make sure there's coherence across all.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the next step will be to take charge of, which may well mean delegating for others to do, fleshing out. So if you end up with these 2 + 5 + 3, so you've got 10 potential challenges in column 3, fleshing them out, which in some cases I think is just going to be a matter of going back to your notes and deciding which sentences or paragraph belongs to that. In other cases, maybe asking someone else what the hell they meant.
And the idea is the structure will be the same across these 5 different manuscripts, and it will follow.
The idea is like the challenges papers 5-6 years ago, is to, so each paper will have an introduction, will have its numbered challenges 1 to 10 or whatever it is, and the discussion at the end. And because we see it as being a sort of, there is an element of cross tabulation as set out here between, let's call them applications being the columns and methodology being the rows, then the introduction for an applications paper like this should try and have some discussion of cross-referencing to, well, both the other applications, but also to methodology things. And also, if there are some challenges which we feel are very important for combating pandemics, but are really political challenges or something that's, you know, so far from the modeling community that we're not going to try and write a sort of modeling type description of what the challenge is, then at least we can make a point in an introduction that these are important as things to be considered, and try and give a reference to some paper somewhere more appropriate that discusses that aspect of things. Valerie, is that about right?
Yeah, I think that's fine. I was just thinking, I mean, as always, we are thinking primarily of things where we can actually contribute, in the sense of challenges to modelers, to data analysts, whatever. If the challenge is really to I don't know, something rather more biological perhaps and less specifically mathematical, then we might want to identify it, but not be able to say very much about what the actual challenge is. I mean, I guess what we're trying to do is identify things that we think that our community, sort of broadly writ, can actually contribute and has the skills to. So you might think of some of them as being topics for future PhD students or something to look at a particular area of challenges.
But then, you know, I mean, I think I have to see how it goes, because I can imagine that you know, it might be appropriate to have a, you know, rather than putting as introductory material, if you felt that there was, I don't know, some challenges for field biologists or something, which we didn't really want to, you could still set those, you could still put them as a numbered challenge, even if it was, you know, even if you indicated that it plainly wasn't for the modeling community themselves to tackle. I think it's
well, I think at the moment we just want to sort of keep everything, don't throw anything away, as it were.
Exactly.
And we'll have to decide later whether it's something we can use and fit in, and exactly how best to do that.
The other thing to say is, and I don't know if this applies to, maybe it doesn't apply so much to these applications things, as that several of the methodological challenge people are coming up with things that they feel might go into tutorial or position papers on a particular methodology that is relevant to and could be made more of, rather than being specific challenges. And I mean, one was the structured expert judgment. There was the sort of political policy thing of whether is COVID-19 a wicked problem. and there was, I think, some sort of tutorial thing on modelling. Is that right?
No, well, I don't think, I'm not sure about modelling. The obvious two, where there were discussions of both the structured expert judgment and the uncertainty quantification. In both cases, they were coming up with potential challenges, but also the feeling that both methods have a lot to contribute at the moment in terms of, well, understanding uncertainty and quantifying all the different sorts of uncertainty, or combining results of different sorts of modelling in the expert judgment and so on, where they felt that these were areas which were not well enough known, and that some sort of tutorial paper setting out how you do it in a particular sort of case study might be a useful thing. So a lot of the points that they were making were coming from that aspect rather than the specific challenges to the methodology. And so it looked as if a possible strategy might be to have some sort of descriptive or tutorial paper that could go alongside the challenges, or be elsewhere published in some way, that would provide that sort of illustration and get the methods known to a much wider
so it's a bit,
much wider audience.
Yeah, so it's a bit like so we're envisaging that the new challenges volume might consist of 10 challenges papers, but also some rather like appendices, some specific papers on specific methodological topics. I thought it's worth mentioning this because it's always possible that the applications might throw up something which is parallel to that in some way, which might also make a sort of tutorial paper or something. I mean, I can't quite see what the topic would be, but it's just something to bear in mind. You know, if we find we're coming up with a lot of stuff that we want to discuss or that we feel is relevant, but we can't really see how to frame it as a challenge, there might be a possibility of adding it as a sort of separate paper in that way.
Yeah,
somehow.
exactly. I think that's right. I think we want to keep all the options open, really. And, you know, if there's something that people think would be useful to do, then we want to try to enable that if we can.
But I do think Valerie's call to arms is also very useful, right? So thinking about emergence and economics, behavior, I think, you know, thinking about there's so much to say, but there's not necessarily stuff that we actually add value to.
Yeah.
And I, you know, the ways in which globalization has shaped roles of how pathogen emergence might happen, etc. Right? Those might be things where we could say something, or we could point to ways in which we could say more. But the call to arms is good and crisply making clear what we can and can't do, I think.
Yeah, I think that's good. So another thing, I just a thing of discussion here, that are people aware that is everyone aware that we've booked a slot for Thursday evening in the UK time, which will be Thursday afternoon for those in Princeton. So 8 p.m. in the UK, which is 3 p.m. on Thursday for you, and is 9 o'clock on Friday morning for New Zealand. Is that right, Valerie?
Yeah. With the idea that we might have a discussion with all three columns at once, as it were.
It was just because we were saying it was a bit of a pity that we have, you know, mix sometimes and you other times, and we never get both. So looking at the clock, that's the kind of time slot that hopefully might be possible for everyone.
Could we shift it an hour earlier? Because I have a lab group meeting I have to go to at 3 on a Thursday.
I think we probably could, but
or if we went later, well, how long is your meeting?
Later, when we're looking then at 9:30 your time, because it always overruns the one I go to.
Well, then you shouldn't. If you don't go, think.
But if we did an hour earlier, if we're thinking about an hour, so 7 to 8 our time, 2 to 3 for Princeton.
I can currently do 2 to 3 or 3 to 4, so whichever works from my end.
Well, 3 to 4 doesn't work for Andy. So, I mean, the whole point of trying to do this was to find a time to get everybody. So, so I think that needs to be ruled out.
Okay, so let's.
We need to check with Mick that he was happy to start at 8 rather than 9, but hopefully he will.
Okay. That's it. And obviously you need to check with Newton staff for Kira.
Well, yes, I think the idea was to just sort of give us a link and leave us to it. So I don't think there'll be a problem with
I think there'll
staff.
be a problem, but we need to obviously do that.
Yeah. Is that all right with you, Cons? Are you okay?
Yes, that's potentially fine. I mean, I would prefer a later time, but I can try earlier, so that's fine. It's just about small kids, basically.
It sounds as if later isn't really feasible.
7 p.m. UK is 8 p.m. for you, is it? I think, Cons. No, you're Bristol. No, you're in this country.
Cons is
I'm in the UK.
You're in the UK, aren't you? I just keep thinking that's a German accent. You must be Central European time.
No, but I'm still in the UK. Just resistant.
Okay.
If you want to go late, I mean, I could do 9 o'clock your time. I could do 4 o'clock and just leave the thing, the other thing, whichever works for you. But the 3 to 4 slot is taken.
Yeah.
So 4 would be, so it will be starting at 9.
Yeah.
Our time. It's okay for me. An hour later is probably okay for Mick. Preferences. What are we doing? We're going an hour earlier or an hour later?
I would go an hour later myself. But...
Is that okay for you, Andy? Can you do 4?
Absolutely. 4 I've got them fine.
And Jess, that's.
Yep, that works.
Okay, so we'll go an hour later. But,
Olivier, okay for you?
That should be fine, yeah. So would that be 9 p.m., did you say?
That would be 9, yeah.
Okay. That should be fine.
With coffee. Well, Mick, whenever we have meetings with Mick, which are first thing in the morning, and Mick is after dinner, and he always greets us with a large glass of wine. So I think
it's our opportunity to get
our
revenge back.
We will get our own back.
We could see if we can get Miriam, though for Miriam I suppose it will be 10 p.m.
Yeah. Yes, we really need to look at her column. Well, inevitably, I mean, there's a lot down there in interventions, although I mean, I haven't looked at them in detail. I don't know whether any of them can be sort of rolled together, because in terms of the challenges for data or modeling or whatever, it may be that the challenge is the same, even though the intervention is a bit different.
Yes, I mean, I don't know if.
But there's a lot, inevitably, there's a lot in that column.
Yeah. And whether some of it can be rolled together when you actually come to expressing it as challenges, I don't know.
Well, I don't know either. I haven't looked through it in detail, but.
So essentially the task of the 5 authors is to see if they'd like to move stuff into their columns or out of their columns, and to sort of tidy up the structure of their columns by Thursday.
That would be perfect.
Yep.
Wouldn't it?
Yes, it would be.
See whether this actually makes sense.
They can negotiate with each other about things to move back and forth.
Yeah.
Yes. So is it is it too ambitious to ask people to maybe produce some revised notes for their column with taking what's in the column and sort of giving it back its slightly longer text.
Yeah, I think that's a way to go.
And also, yeah, and that will clarify, of course, whether some of these things have been, I think some of these things I'm sure been thought through more thoughtfully and better than others. Some have just been put down as topics without really any explanation. Some have come with quite a good explanation. So if one restores them as that, so I would suggest that those should go with those should go in the in their appropriate folder. You know, if it's emergence, it should go in the ch03 Dropbox folder with maybe sort of, 03 notes or something as a title or whatever, or outline or whatever you like to call it. But and I think it would be great if at least one of Miriam and Deirdre could join us. So I think we ought to send an email. I'll be happy to send an email to them, seeing if they could manage Thursday evening.
Mm-hmm.
And if we've got a provisional time of moving it the 1 hour later, I think I'd like to be able to ask them, you know, say we've provisionally scheduled it for the later slot, but if they can't do that but could do the earlier slot, you know, if they say now, we could revise our position and go for the earlier slot. Would that be, is that our position?
I guess so. I think everybody would prefer the later one. That's my impression. And we need to check that Mick is okay with that.
Yeah.
Also.
We'll need to check with Mick as well too. So
Yes.
So I'll send an email round. Well, I'll copy it to everyone here, but I'll send it to Miriam, Deirdre, and Mick, just saying saying that provisionally having a discussion then, and if they have time to look at a bare column of the table and expand, or where it's actually been boiled down, to re-expand the material in their column, that would be great. But the first question really is just, well, could they join us on Thursday?
I mean, Jess and Andy and Miriam, I think those three at least provided some pretty good notes. So it should be just a question of, you know, rearranging stuff. Mick, ideally, you would ask him to expand his a bit, because he just gave brief titles, didn't he?
Yeah.
So it'd be quite good if he could just write a sentence about each one. The ones in Deirdre's column came from the sticky notes, didn't they?
Yeah.
But probably that's, so there isn't anything to expand them at the moment.
No, I mean well, what's in the table is it will have been compressed a bit into sound bites, but it's from.
Well, there wasn't much on the.
There wasn't much. They were fairly
notes.
short. They were fairly short sentences on the.
Yeah.
On the notes.
Okay.
So.
Okay, so we're going in, we're editing our columns. We're doing it within the environment of our own Dropbox folder, our own personalized Dropbox folder. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the IDP. Oh yeah, your person meaning yes, your
our subset, the subsets measures. Okay, great. And we're going to just try and like smooth it, make sure everything's there, and make offers to other columns if we feel that we.
Why not? Some bargaining.
Yes,
trading.
I'll swap you. Swap you this for that or whatever. Yes.
I think what would be really good would be between you, if you could look for gaps. Are there things that we haven't in that table where we think there are bits that have?
Well, in particular, and I think also bearing in mind, you know, is there someone we know? I mean, probably ideally someone who's sort of signed up to IDP in some way already, so but doesn't have to be, or postdoc with lots of enthusiasm and time, who. But I think also, people.
That's the empty set.
but I suppose the key thing really though would be to say, actually, are there gaps in what we are personally interested in, where bringing in another co-author might cover some important aspect that we're not covering.
Yep.
I mean, yeah. I mean, to give an example that's at the top of Valerie's and my mind at the moment, in estimation, we've had a great big pile on from two relatively novel approaches to, or non-standard approaches to estimation, which are the uncertainty quantification and the structured judgment. And both of these are very relevant, but we feel that actually more sort of mainstream traditional estimation has got slightly left out. So we're keen to go out and recruit or re-recruit people who will cover that part of that topic. So I'm not at all sure what the equivalent would be in these things, because
I think the trouble with that area is that both uncertainty quantification and structured judgment are areas which could be used but are not being used at the moment, not centrally in producing all the data that's going to SAGE and, you know, the policy making advisory groups and so on. And the people that are doing the more traditional estimation are absolutely flat out doing it and with little time to you know, interact with us. But it is a gap at the moment, and we do need to try and find some people with time to do a bit on the more sort of you know, straight down the middle traditional estimation and statistical inference generally. But bandwidth is difficult for them, I think. Yeah. Good. So
we non-column owners, we wait a little bit, or is there any sort of central document to add notes?
I think.
I mean, Thursday is short, right? So we might just, or in my position, I might just wait a little bit.
Well, I think though that you would be really good at, you know, if you do spot things which you might well. That we're not covering at the moment, and in areas at some of these interfaces and so on that are of interest. You know, it would be really good if you know.
I might add this later. I mean, Andy, in terms of your document, I had a few things in mind, like population density. There could be heterogeneity could be added to a few points.
Yep.
And maybe also persistence of pathogens. And to me, this would add also a little bit in terms of environment, virus diversity to natural history of pathogens. So it's basically it's sort of in there already, right? It's just maybe we can add a few keywords in this respect and then see how it develops.
So would a way to address that be for you to jot down a few of these and send them by email round rather than putting them in, unless you're going to write a lot, putting them in a separate document, but just, and then the people who are doing these various columns can sort of bear it in mind while they're rejigging them and think whether they can work them in some way.
Yeah, and I think if you send around, if you make suggestions like that, if you can maybe do them as a list of separate items with each one, for each one maybe a suggestion. I think this perhaps goes in estimation cross emergence, or whichever, you know, which just suggesting which box it might go in, something like that. That would be
that
good.
would be really good, really helpful.
Okay. That's probably once manuscripts develop, right? I mean, then it's easier to say, okay, this is sort of one idea, and then you add concept to this particular idea. But of course, I keep this in mind. It's just now a question if I should add something, or I mean, I try whatever's possible.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. Right, and I've saved this in the state it's got to, and I've left it being called 3rd November. So if you've got it on your computers, I suggest you exit. You know, exit without saving, please, and then reload, and you'll have the version as it's as it's shared, as on the shared screen.
You usually get, well, at least I do, and presumably other people do too. It says it's been changed, and you're given an option to download the latest version. So
right, okay,
but one way or the other, yeah.
Okay, so I'll email around the 3 other column people and let people know as quickly as possible, particularly if there's a suggestion that they would want to go for the earlier time rather than the later.
We do need to sort the timing, yeah.
They've just literally filled in that 2 o'clock slot for me. So the 4 o'clock is much better for me now.
Okay.
Much better. Okay, I shall twist arms for 4 o'clock. Okay.
Yeah.
Just got a message popped up on the screen. Oh, you have a meeting. That's like,
okay. So, well, hopefully it's all right for us, and so hopefully it will, as long as Mick can do it, and ideally Miriam and Deirdre will be okay. It'll be a bit late for Miriam, I suppose.
Well, Deirdre's got a little one as well, but we'll see.
Yeah, but evenings are often
that might be, that's true. Yeah,
it can be once all is in bed, it can be easier. So, but I don't know how. But for Miriam, of course, it will be an extra hour on, so it will be starting at 10.
Yeah.
So how she would feel, I don't know. Anyway,
there we are.
Okay. Well, lovely to see you all.
Yeah,
right.
thank you.
Yeah.
See you again soon.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Paul. Can you stop recording?
Yeah, it's just stopping now.